Trump people, alt-right people, to refer to the American establishment, they said, okay, this is invented from Turkey, and they were accusing Hillary Clinton as being representative of the American derivatives. They used that word by word in Turkish form. Derivative, not they got deep state, deeper state. You see what I mean? So that's sort of an, this is I think universal trend. This is inevitable. So how to democratize this might require administrative centralization. I don't know. I'm being speculative here, but I hope you get the point. But another thing about Turkey is that, well, Turkey has already been thriving upon Turkish politics, thriving upon those informal ties. So Turkey was quick to adapt to and understand and embrace neoliberalism. So we were inherently neoliberal in terms of our political infrastructure. We just made a transition to that sort of a political scheme easily. That's why Turkey was one of the first successful examples of neoliberal reforms. I hope that point is clear. That biz hazırdık buna. We were already mentally and politically speaking, we were already ready for this. And another thing is Turkey has been governed by the presidential system at the local scale since 1963. When we began to directly elect the mayors, right? So it's not something new to us.
Sir?
Yeah,
well, actually, I think that the emergence of these strong political figures, strong dictators, it is due to the people's will to not to think, people's ignorance. People are much less educated than before, let's say 50 years ago. And then they just let their decisions to this strong figure, to the dictator.
Yes, I would agree.
This is the result of their will to not to think and not to decide, because if they assume the responsibility of deciding themselves, they wouldn't have let the decisions to this strong figure. And we have seen the results of such a press during the Second World War. The German people left their decision to Hitler and his crew, and at the end they have been ruined. And the future expecting us, if we let the decisions to these strong figures, is to be ruined like the German people at the end of the Second World War.
Okay.
So it's not a very positive thing to
just a few things though.
Positive policy to pursue actually.
I might have to disagree with you upon whether or not this has to do with the people's own individual traits or demographic figures or socioeconomic profiles being transformed. But one thing, just let me go back to the rise of strong figures in Turkey, the mayor figure, when they became very popular around here. Let's go back to the story of Mr. Erdogan or Mr. Gökçek. So they became popular political figures upon their upon getting elected to the post of mayor's office in 1994, like some 30 years ago, sharp. In 1991, Refah Partisi, the Welfare Party, it was called Welfare. And if you know, it used to be called the National Salvation Party, right? But if you know the history of National Salvation Party, it was an industrial bourgeoisie party, right? This is how it started. But then it turned into a different agenda, or turned its gaze towards a different political agenda. That political agenda was in 1991. You can just find the videos, election propaganda videos of Welfare Party. They were socialist propaganda videos. You can go and check. Go and check, they're still available on YouTube. They're socialist propaganda videos of Welfare Party. Because the Welfare Party got organized, had a major strategy change, and began to get organized in the ghettos, or I'd call squatter neighborhoods, squatter areas. Those squatter areas were the areas that used to vote for socialist mayors of Republican People's Party just before 1980. The same people who voted for the socialists voted for Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Gökçek in Ankara and Istanbul. So people didn't change. Calculations didn't change. And there was a decent and sincere promise on the part of Mr. Erdogan, Mr. Gökçek, that we will serve people first, and we will help with the poor's problems first. That's how it turned into a hegemonic project. So I don't think that people changed. People have been always the same. The same people voted for a socialist, then voted for an Islamist and openly called. But they then later said, okay, we are Democrats now. We are Muslims, but we are Muslim Democrats. Müslüman Democrat. Right? So I'm not sure about, again, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree with you that this change has to do with a major change in people's socioeconomic profile. To the contrary, Turkey is now a much better educated country. But people have to act rationally. So I think this is a result of individual rational action and rational voting, ending up with sometimes politically irrational results. So I wouldn't agree with you on those accounts. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Hocam, for this very insightful presentation. I have two questions, if I may. One is that you mentioned this model that you show us exactly right here is a neoliberal one. So my first question is,
Yeah, go ahead.
do you think there's only one neoliberal model? Do you think neoliberalism needs to be informal? And the second question is, within that scheme of things, the relations between scales, like this, how this very micro local or local level that are getting more and more important, relate with the global one.
Okay.
And the third question, again, the same picture,
Okay.
is related to what you mentioned about hegemony.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned this picture is related to maybe more and more decentralization, but centralization at the same time. So do you think, even though there is this very strong centralization with this one man type of politics, hegemony is getting more and more fragmented.
Hegemony is getting more and more.
More and more fragmented.
What do you mean by fragmented?
Not weak, but fragmented.
Okay. Okay. So, to get more specific, just let me just get back to this scheme. Okay, this is not. Okay. So this used to be the center of the capitalist state. It's still the capitalist state here. It's still governed, coordinated from here, politically speaking. It didn't change, but it has expanded into. This is the Big Bang. So this is the first point, just to remind. And the thing is, before neoliberalism, we still had local institutions. We still had global institutions. But something else happened. There were new layers of governance being like supranational institutions like EU or continental unions and also regional institutions. So these are brand new. Right? But also local city scale, for instance, institutions began to gain power. So first we witnessed the emergence of first metropolitan municipalities, then they became province-wide metropolitan municipalities, right? So they get increasingly centralized within themselves. And we had new global institutions emerging too, or getting stronger. So this is not new, but it's being like rearranged. This is not new, but its configuration, how they are interrelated, is rearranged. But what is new here is this structure becoming increasingly official and more visible and more effective, but more selective. So this is what we mean by neoliberalization. But there is not a single neoliberal model from my point of view. Not only view, but my explanatory framework allows me to develop this argument. Let me proceed. Okay, from the view of our welfare and well-being generation. Remember I gave you the example of one person, right, going through different, right, domains to get well. Well, here I have the example of person A and person B. So the person A and person B, or this is neighborhood A, this is neighborhood B, or this is city A, this is city B, this is country A, this is country B. What do you mean? This neighborhood relies more on public, so a bit less on market and a bit less on civil society. So this neighborhood relies more on market and society and less on public services for survival. To give you an example, in Istanbul, for instance, which domain would be much more dominant? Where would you locate Istanbul here? Right? Here. So it will be not here, but it will be really here, right? It's rather here. This is Istanbul. Where would you locate Ankara? It's here, right? Civil society not that much. And markets really Ankara here, right? Where would you locate Erzurum, for instance? Erzurum up here. Let me tell you. First, a bit of here at those civil societies, Erzurum. You see what I mean? But the thing is, in Ankara, where would you locate Sinjar? Where would you locate Bağlıca? Where would you locate Çayyolu? Where would you locate Cebeci? See, every single one of them is a different welfare package. Neoliberalism is about the change in the way, change in the logic of governance, not necessarily change in the way in which policies are made. You see, the way in which, because this is what you took over from the previous period. You see what I mean? So this is how you have varieties of neoliberalism. I mean, this is how I explain with reference to this chart. So this is a three-dimensional one, so you can add even other dimensions. Right? This is how you end up with. So even within the same, this is what we call varieties of capitalism, or variegated neoliberalization. So this is how you can explain. So this was hopefully was my way of answering your first question. Your second question,
The relation between local and global.
Local and global, as I have said, is increasingly uneven. So Istanbul is global. Well, in the fate of Istanbul, you need the Emir of Qatar, right? And the European Central Bank, or the owners of major European companies, right? They have direct stake in, or the Russian billionaires, they have a direct interest and stake in the development of Istanbul property sector. You cannot tell. Or, for instance, you see Mr. İmamoğlu like visiting other countries' leaders, and also having, and it's something that I've been working on, and having direct contact with, for instance, the mayor of Budapest. Because the mayor of Budapest is their İmamoğlu against Urban. Mr. İmamoğlu here against Mr. Erdogan, right? So this is how you have this political competition, the same thing happening. And he's also building a network of political support from global players.
So my question was like, what I had in mind, can he jump scale?
Who?
Can İmamoğlu jump nation scale?
Yes.
In his relations with
Yes.
global.
And can jump over even global scales. The scale jumping. This is what I wrote on my in my PhD thesis. Scale jumping. This is exactly what, for instance, Gaziantep, it was on Gaziantep business chambers, Chamber of Commerce and Industry. This is how they jumped scale. For instance, they bypassed Minister of Foreign Affairs to have direct access to the embassies, the US Embassy and Israel Embassy here. And direct access to the EU. And the EU's representatives, when they were to visit, I'm talking about 2003 and 2004, even then, when they were to visit the southeastern part of Turkey, they wouldn't contact the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Turkey. They would directly contact the Chamber of Commerce of Gaziantep, and they would organize the EU representatives' regional visits. So they were like the field office of European Union. They just jumped scale. But that helped them to have a better bargaining hand vis-a-vis the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So they would first establish global contacts, and they would knock the door of the ministry saying, see, we have contacts there. The same with Gaza, the same with Syria. Turkey's opening process with Syria started with those lobbying efforts of Gaziantep's industrialists and traders. They changed Turkey's the bylaw for export imports. They rewrote it and they sent it to Ankara and Ankara accepted it. And for that they had their own person, Kürşat Tuzman, as the minister for import and exports, right? He was a state minister then, right? And Syria, for the first time in its own history, had a foreign mission in a city other than the capital of that country. It was in Syria. It's in Gaziantep. And Gaziantep and Aleppo were twin cities right throughout history. So they jumped scale, but they first established contacts with Syria, then thanks to Syrian contacts, they had stronger hand vis-a-vis the Ministry of the central government, ministry. And they changed the bylaw. You see? So they effectively used having a collaborator elsewhere, global scale, and push for change in here, and vice versa. So this is what I mean by getting global. I hope my point is clear now. What was the third one?
You didn't. It's somehow explained.
Yeah, it's explained. I mean, here you don't have one single hegemony. There's this book, I don't know if you must have read it, by Lee Jones and Shahar Hamedi, called Fractured China. It's a wonderful book. Please. Huh? You must have read it with Nick, perhaps. It's a wonderful book. It explains how China's policies, I'm working on the Belt and Road Project, right, BRI, and Kuşak Yol Projesi, effectively. The book explains how come, you think China is a very extremely strong and strongly controlled, strong leader controlled, increasingly centralized, bureaucratized country, right? It's totally the reverse. It's an extremely decentralized country in many respects. So China is exactly like this. This is China. This is China, how the Chinese state is organized. This is China. Perhaps they don't have that bit of a civil society element much.
They do, but control.
Control what? Well, yeah. You know better than I do, right? Here, this is the Chinese state. And here, the provincial governments, locals are very well involved, and they have their own companies here, right? And then private companies too. So this is the Chinese city. So here, you think that the Belt and Road Project is one well thought out domination plan, just like the Nazis, like planning their invasion plans, right? In the geopolitical sense, they have their own geopolitical blueprint. No, that was not the case. Mr. Xi Jinping, he just had this idea, okay, why don't we have this sort of a project? Well, our construction sector needs, and we have some extra capital accumulated here, why don't we just redirect it towards elsewhere, and we will have the global influence emerging, then we will solve our own profitability problem of accumulation regime, right? Accumulation strategy, my apologies. Right? So they did it, and you end up with a series of projects. But here, how the logical explanation goes in that book by Lee Jones and Shahar Hamedi, right? They're good fellows, I met them, they're very nice fellows. Well, Mr. Xi Jinping, he makes a declaration and he just lines out, just gives the highlights of blueprint of a policy. Then there starts a competition within the circles of the Chinese Communist Party and within the bureaucratic circles. And they all come up with their own projects and they offer it to the Mr. Xi Jinping's or the party secretariat's offices. And they say, okay, let's do this, let's do that. So they are also competing amongst themselves to get closer to Mr. Xi Jinping. So you just assume that they will have one single coherent policy. You end up with such instances, for instance. The Minister of Foreign Affairs just signs a memorandum of understanding with Vietnam. Just a day later, the Chinese Navy opens fire at the vessels, the Vietnamese vessels or fishing vessels. outdo each other too. Birbirine kazık atıyorlar. They try to outdo each other, right? So you end up, so it's the same with Turkey. You just expect that Mr. Erdogan has a like all-seeing eye controlling everything. Well, here's a big policy statement. Then people rush in, and you have emerging voices trying to say, okay, let's do this, let's do that. Just people think that there are always twists and turns in Mr. Erdogan's policy. No, this is how the whole scenario works. The same in China, the same in Turkey, right? Of course, there are always corrective interventions trying to line up different policies, but then diverge again. So this is how also hegemony works. You have one big narrative, then you have different players, their own narratives. So Mr. Erdogan, he's the master of coalition building. While never has, for instance, one single political discourse, cultural discourse, never been dominant, but he always controls the agenda. So I wouldn't call if it has been hegemonic in the cultural sense, but he is the master of coalition building. And if we, by understand hegemony, we mean running coalitions, building them, there has been strict control, neoliberal hegemony. I wouldn't say political Islam, for instance. It has never been so. From my point of view. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thanks for the presentation. I have a theoretical question, but in the end, in the end, you mentioned that even the states import problems.
Yes.
From outside. So
not necessarily only import, like consciously
yeah.
bring them over, but they are exposed to them.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So can we say that, or conclude in the conclusion, we can say that if the states continue to import problems, when the problems begin to affect more people, it will also speed up the progress of the finding a solution. Because during the Cold War, we kind of see that, it was a United States versus Soviet Union, but when the problem start being a bigger problem for the world, they choose a side, and it's kind of a cause of the end of the Cold War.
Are you saying that like the more the problems become more prevalent, the more the policymakers are forced to go for it, like do something about it? Okay, there are two different questions here, in fact, merge into one. Number one is, as the scale of problems grow bigger and more prevalent, like geographical spreading, what happens? And number two, how does globalization change the behavior of policymakers in different countries?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with the second one. I think the more you are exposed to, the more better integrated into global politics or global markets, I think the policymakers' room for maneuver, I'm thinking now, is both expanding and getting narrower and narrower. What do we mean? Well, now you become a candidate for the EU. So this means that you are, once you join the EU, you are taking a bolder step towards getting better integrated with the global politics and governance and economy, right? But this means that you are more and more bound by decisions and the rules of the European Union.
Yes.
Right? But this means that the solutions are also incorporated into this scheme. Well, you join the bigger schemes because they will help you solve the problems. But this means that you have less room for initiative. So, at the cost of losing your policy autonomy and capacity, you get your problem solved. Just like an ordinary citizen voting for a strong leader to get his problem solved. So you go for bigger allies, you join bigger institutions to lose perhaps a bit of your autonomy, but your problems are solved. So this might be one thing. Or you borrow from global lenders, you get your problem solved, but that kind of. On the other hand, on the one hand you have this. On the other hand, you have a now broader field of competition. Now you can turn to China as Mr. Erdogan. You can start you have a stronger bargaining hand at the same time. So I cannot give a conclusive answer to your question in that regard, but I think we need to, for every single case, we need to calculate this separately. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
For education, I would give you a different answer. For trade policy, I would get a different answer. So I don't have, we have a homogeneous, like a ready-made answer to that sort of a question. Second question, if the problems get bigger in terms of volume and calls for collective action, global collective action, I think climate change is the case in point, right? It's the most prevalent one now, right? I'm thinking, like, I'm not really I'm no expert on climate policy. But I think governments are forced to act at one point. But this is not happening via governments choosing that course of action consciously. I mean, that sort of a policy change doesn't come from the public domain. It comes from the market domain. Interestingly enough, capitalism, sometimes the logic of capital accumulation could do good to us. By the way, I'm a socialist and Marxist, call myself at least that way. But let me explain. Yesterday I was listening to a commentator speaking on Mr. Trump's new policies. And he says, to hell with green transition, I will bring back the whole coal industry and oil industry. They call it oil up. What? Oil it up, baby. Right? Just bring back oil. But that is to start a serious debate or a struggle between the state governments and the federal government. Because, and this is what I have learned from the commentator, half of the states of the US, they already started their own green transition program, and the investors and industrialists, they have already started their green transition. They have invested into the green infrastructure, they have bought new equipments, they have done new research, they have new types of products. They have, for instance, EVs, right? Electrical vehicles, right? Electricity. So now, the right electric automobiles is the new thing. You cannot undo it. So for that reason, Mr. Trump's major national policy change might not really apply. The same thing happening with the EU. And China has also taken that path. But China is pushing for this not with the claim to be environmentally friendly really, although Mr. Xi Jinping claims to do so, that they're really doing so, but because they get more competitive in that field, in the battery sector. You see what I mean? Yeah. So once China pushes for it, the others have to follow. You see what I mean? So the problems get bigger, but if someone takes the action, then others have to follow, not to lose the competition in the market domain.
Kind of a domino effect?
Yes, but that domino effect has to work through the logic of profit and capital accumulation. So you can manipulate the logics of capital accumulation. Of course, I'm being extremely optimistic here. Yes. Okay, now, yes.
So could you comment on public policy making process and the usage of social media nowadays? Because I believe that the power of the social media is getting more powerful each day and start to affect this process. But it seems like it is affected like at the end when the things happened and some people decide on some policies. But now we see that this power makes them to get setback from these policies at the same time. For example, I remember kind of like credit card limits and some payment to the national defense, and a very strong reaction from the public from via these tools, set back this and postpone it to the following year, etc. There can be many examples in like